to what we call our Disasters and Development event. As Henry highlights, World Jewish Relief is no stranger to disasters. The origins of the organisation were born out of a desire to respond to catastrophic disaster facing European Jewry in the 1930s. And whether it be at regional, country, household or individual level, we've been helping people cope with disaster ever since. I'd like to just take you back about 2.5 years. 12th of January 2010. An earthquake of catastrophic proportions struck just below the surface of Port-au-Prince, the capital of Haiti in the Caribbean. It was late afternoon, kids were in school, shops were busy, offices were packed. The quake, which lasted about 2 minutes, reduced a city of outdated buildings and poorly constructed tower blocks to absolute rubble. Surprisingly, earthquakes don't kill people, buildings kill people. And those that fell in Haiti that day did so in their thousands. 300,000 people were crushed and killed, and 1 million made homeless in just a matter of minutes. Haiti was one of the poorest countries of the world, where 2 out of 3 individuals lived in poverty before the earthquake struck. And so this tragedy just heaped misery upon an already challenged population. What was the largest earthquake to hit an urban centre since something like the 17th century brought the country to its knees, decapitated government, 6 out of 18 ministers were killed, and our television screen said it all, a cry for help from the international community. Well, it was about 10 o'clock in the evening when I first heard the news, the scale of the disaster, and I picked up the phone to my director of fundraising, Paul Steen, who knows I disturb him at any time of the day, and we immediately kick-started our emergency appeal mechanism. Now, there are 3 simple criteria that WJR has to go through to assess whether it launches an emergency appeal or not. The first is that the scale of the disaster shows an overwhelming level of unmet humanitarian need. The second is that if we raise any money, we can go some way towards alleviating that humanitarian need. And the third is that there are reasonable grounds to conclude that an appeal would be successful based on the level of sustained pressing public interest. We recognised immediately, given the scale of that disaster, that it was time to appeal. Now, World Jewish Relief, as you've probably seen and heard tonight, World Jewish Relief, we're a relatively small organisation. We have a relatively small number of staff, and we try to keep our costs to a minimum. And so appealing on our own wouldn't pack as mighty a punch as it does as appealing on behalf of British Jewry. And we're absolutely so fortunate that we don't appeal on our own. We appeal with 13 other Jewish communal agencies behind us. And that enables us to respond in a far greater way than we do. In response to the Haiti earthquake, World Jewish Relief raised a staggering £560,000. Our initial response was obviously to focus on life-saving interventions, the construction of clean water towers, provision of shelter. We worked through local partner agencies that were able to access local supplies and hence avoid the logjam that other international agencies face trying to bring goods through the airport or through the port that had been partially damaged. As the severity of the disaster became much more apparent and the lasting impact on infrastructure and services became clearer, we realised we needed to make a much more strategic approach to our response. And working in partnership with the international health agency, Merlin, we rapidly established 8 mobile health clinics in the most affected parts of the countries, providing a quite simple but effective primary healthcare service to 24,000 people over the following 2 years. When cholera struck Haiti, Haiti had a tough time, a very tough year. When cholera struck Haiti 6 months after the earthquake struck, our clinics were at the forefront of that response. We didn't seek to make a fanfare of the programme, just simply sought to ensure our resources were carefully and independently managed, went to the right people at the right time, and stayed there long after the cameras had gone. Our partner Merlin acknowledged that without World Jewish Relief's support, those clinics wouldn't have been mobilised, and not so many people would have had a very simple but effective healthcare service. Today, these clinics are being handed over in a more permanent capacity to the Haitian Ministry of Health. Without a doubt, British Jewry saved Haitian lives, and we should be proud of it. Now, I'm sure you've noticed that there just seems to be one disaster after another on our television screens. This is not some clever scandal driven by international agencies to generate funds for themselves. It's a fact that our changing climate has indeed led to more frequent, more severe disasters. And as a result of the increasing urbanisation of our global population, when those disasters do occur, they affect more people. They usually affect those people that are least able to cope. Today, 40 of the 50th fastest growing cities of the world are sited on earthquake fault lines. 68% of the world's population lives in monsoon-affected areas where the risk of flooding, because of rising coastal waters, increases year on year. Our world is changing. Disasters are going to happen more often. More people will be affected, and we as a Jewish community will be expected and will play our part. When monsoon rains exceeded the capacity of rivers flowing through Pakistan in August 2010, floodwaters covered an area greater than the size of England. An unimaginable 20 million people were suddenly at danger, as 1.9 million homes were washed away. Those numbers are incomprehensible, and sometimes when I talk about numbers to people I speak to, the concept of the tragedy at an individual, personal, household level is completely swept away. As with all emergencies, World Jewish Relief has to think very carefully about launching the appeal. The Pakistan context brought an additional dimension, but the scale of humanitarian need and the overwhelming and unanimous decision from the 13 other communal agencies encouraged us to immediately launch an appeal. We very quickly contacted our Pakistani partner agency, Human Aid Focus, who we worked closely with in 2005 following the tragic earthquake that hit Kashmir in December 2005. And I'm delighted that Mohammed Sheikh, President of Human Aid Focus, who resides in the UK, will talk a little bit after me and tell you from the other side of the spectrum how important it was to see British Jewry supporting the Pakistani partner. We raised about £250,000 from British Jewry in response to the Pakistan earthquake. We gave grants to women construction grants to women whose houses had been washed away. We helped them rebuild their livelihoods. And together with funds from the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, were able to rebuild flood protection defences and bridges, footbridges over flood-affected areas. We know as international humanitarian agencies actually that we need to be smarter about our responses. Remarkably, we'd like to be responding before the disasters occur. Disaster preparedness is a far more cost-effective way of responding to disasters than waiting until after the event. Part of this is in the way we do respond, in that when we respond we seek to build the resilience and strengthen the capacity of those communities affected so they're better able to respond the next time disaster occurs. Our West Africa Food Security Appeal, where 10 million people face the prospect of food insecurity, is urging our supporters at the moment to encourage us to prevent the disaster happening. I don't want to wait until there are starving kids on our television before we ask people to assist us. We have to act before then. And finally, money. I'm not going to ask you for money, unusually enough. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we've done with it. Since 2004, World Jewish Relief has raised over £2.8 million in responding to international disasters. And we've assisted over 120,000 people. Now, I should first add, that is money raised over and above our core traditional activities in helping primarily, but not exclusively, vulnerable Jewish communities in the forms they've been in. Amidst great tragedy and disaster, I think it's fantastic what the Jewish community has enabled us to do, and to reach those beyond their own community. Tsunami in Sri Lanka, cyclone in Burma, conflict in Congo, famine in East Africa, we continue to want to reach beyond our community, and that work is now central to our own role. And while our interventions have to prioritise life-saving activities, we know the importance of ensuring that we intervene in lasting, sustainable activities that help build the resilience of those communities we work with. I've learned in my 25 years of working in the international humanitarian world that when doubting my own efforts and in determining the critical intervention that we will make, we have to ask ourselves the question, if it was me, what would I want from this organisation? Using our increasing experience from our work in the former Soviet Union, where we're now trying to help extricate communities living in chronic poverty and get them back into work, I'm keen that we're able to apply some of those activities into our work post-disaster. My programmes team, led by Stacey Swimer, scrutinise everyone, the integrity and capacity of every one of our partners, visits each of our project sites, and insists upon the highest levels of accountability. Only if WJR can demonstrate to its supporters that we spend your money wisely, that it goes to those people that need it most, and in the most cost-effective way, will you continue to have faith in us. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to invite one of our close partners, Mohammed Sher, President of Human Aid Focus, to talk to you a little bit about the Kashmiri perspective of working with the Jewish community program. Thank you.